Okay, well, we have a few loose ground rules. We're going to take turns asking questions, and we'll take turns answering who gets to answer first. We didn't flip a coin, so I'll just make a last-minute decision when we come to it in this case, who gets to go first. We will allow 2 minutes for your first answer. I'll be timing that. If you want to engage in a little back and forth after on each question, we'll give you a chance to come back. I don't have a strict time limit on that, but if I think you're repeating yourself, I'll step in and kindly say you're repeating yourself. Okay, so Mr. Shaw from Fox News drew the first question. Jim, we're going to let you ask the first question, and I think we'll start with Ms. Gulleson as the first answerer. So, Jim, have at it.
Thank you, Charlie. I want to ask about the $1 trillion budget deficit and how you both would balance the budget. Even if the economy grows, to balance the budget, there will have to be deep spending cuts or tax increases or changes in tax deductions or a combination thereof. I would like to know specifically where you both would like to cut spending or raise taxes to balance the budget.
Okay. Pam?
All right. Thank you, Jim. Right now, our country is borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar that we have from countries that we compete with directly. We are spending $3 for every dollar, or $2 that we take in. So the reality is, of course, we cannot stay on this path. It is contributing to the deficit, and we've got to respond to it. Here's what I look at. I say we need to look at every single agency's budget. We need to ask them to come forward with a 5% across-the-board cut. They need to identify what those cuts would be. We just saw, I think, a pretty good example with the Farm Bill that was brought forward on the Senate side. That has a 9% cut. That was identified with the agencies, with the Senate Democrats, Republicans. That's what we need to be doing with each of these agencies. It's going to be up to them to be able to help identify these, but the obligation will be that everybody has to be part of contributing to this solution long term. We can't continue with these deficits as we see them.
Let me just ask a follow-up. What about tax increases? Are you open to the idea of raising taxes on some or all taxpayers?
At the end of the year, the Bush tax cuts expire. I support extending the tax cuts for everyone up to that $250,000. But beyond that, then the tax cuts would expire for that. That would contribute, obviously, to additional revenue towards this solution.
Okay, Mr. Cramer?
Well, several things that come to mind. First of all, yes, we have a $16 trillion debt and growing at the rate that you talked about, the $1 trillion per year at the current rate. That is unsustainable. In fact, that $16 trillion debt exceeds the productivity of our nation's economy, which is so unsustainable as to be Greece if we weren't able to print our own money. It has to be dealt with. What I propose is the first thing we should do is roll the budget back to 2008 levels. In 2008, I picked 2008 because that's pre-stimulus, pre-Obamacare, pre-TARP, pre-bailouts. Because now, the reason the Democrat-controlled United States Senate won't pass a budget is because they get to keep building on top of this false floor that was created by all this super spending. We have to go back to 2008, make that the baseline, then ask every agency to come in with 5% cuts, and not just across the board, however. And that is where I differ from my opponent, because in the Schaefer administration, I submitted 4 budgets. Every budget was less than the previous budget. And our challenge, the challenge to us from Governor Schaefer was, don't cut across the board, but rather prioritize your programs, pick the priorities, and then cut the bottom priority rather than just sort of spreading the pain. Let's get rid of outdated, inefficient programs, because we need an efficient government. By doing that, I do think there's a lot of room for growth on the other side, and that growth, I think, comes from growing the economy, not from growing the rate on taxpayers. Let's grow the economy. I think a measure like that would carry with it a tremendous signal into the marketplace that we're serious about this, because the expiration of the expiration of the tax rates comes with it the loss of thousands more jobs. We also have a very fragile economy in this country, and we can't turn around the budget or the economy unless we get serious.
We'll just ask a follow-up and then move on to the other questioners. Tax rates for the very rich are at their lowest levels in more than 60 years. Are you open to the idea of raising taxes on the rich as part of the solution to cut the deficit?
What I'm open to is getting rid of the loopholes and the deductions for the very rich and everybody else as well, and having a flatter tax code that sends clear signals in the marketplace that allows everybody to pay their fair share. And certainly that will require wealthier people to pay more. But let's not forget that Obamacare itself, as an example, raises taxes on the, quote, very rich and a whole bunch of other places, like 18 other places, and it's going to kill jobs. So we have to be careful not to kill jobs. Jim, if the very rich paid 100% taxes, we could run the government for 9 months. That wouldn't do much for the government or for the economy.
Okay. Pam, do you want a shot at Jim's follow-up?
I do. Everything that we've seen over the last number of years is that we see a widening gap. The wealthy are getting more wealthy. Even during these years of recession, they have done incredibly well, while the poor and the middle class have gone backwards. So I support ending the Bush tax cuts for the very, very wealthy, and I don't support the Paul Ryan budget, which my opponent does, which would give an additional $150,000 in tax cuts to the very, very wealthy. That's the wrong direction. That's not how we're going to grow this economy. We really have to start in the middle and grow it out.
Okay, let's move on to our second questioner, Paul Jerkins, KFGO Radio. Paul?
I'd like to direct this to Commissioner Cramer first off, and then if candidate Gulleson would like to respond. Smith Motors, Rydell Chevrolet, Murphy Motors, Cassette Motors, all General Motors dealerships in this state. The auto bailout, the president's been criticized. Hundreds of thousands of jobs in North Dakota would likely be lost had the GM dealers disappeared. I've not heard you address this issue, Commissioner Cramer, and what are your thoughts? Was that the right move?
Well, first of all, I doubt hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Hundreds, hundreds if not thousands.
And secondly, I don't know that the GM bailout necessarily saved GM dealerships in North Dakota. I don't know the facts surrounding that, but I do know these facts, that there were also other firms that literally lost their licenses, lost their franchises here in North Dakota that did cost dozens, if not hundreds of jobs, and certainly lots of revenue. I don't think that picking winners and losers is the job of the government. I think that the free market ought to work. I would have preferred some sort of a managed, allowing them to fail, if you will, rather than bailing them out, but having more of a managed Chapter 11 or something like that that still would have allowed the GM to continue, but under, I think, more fair rules than simply a taxpayer-funded bailout, where we still, the federal government still is a large shareholder in an industry. And as you probably noticed, Paul, it's been very good for Ford and others as well. Now, I happen to drive a General Motors vehicle, and I'm happy to drive it, but I think it could have been handled much, much better, and that doesn't mean that there would necessarily have been a loss of hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs in North Dakota.
Ms. Gulleson, your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, as hard as it is, and I don't think anybody likes the notion that we have to bail out anybody, the banks or auto dealers or anybody else. But the reality is that tough decisions were made. We now have a domestic auto industry in this country again. These are real jobs, not only here for North Dakota, but for Michigan and Ohio, and critically important jobs. So those are some of the tough decisions. But listen, we had to crawl out of a deep, deep ditch. This country was facing some of the darkest times since the last Depression, by far. And so you make the tough decisions, and it has worked out. Obviously, we have auto dealerships here in North Dakota who are doing extremely well. Our economy here has helped support it. But nationwide, it's made a real difference in the economy.
Okay, I think we move on. I think everybody covered that one okay. Don Haney, what would your question be? And who would you, if you don't have a specific person, we'll start with Pam, but if you feel a need to direct
okay,
that's fine.
We'll start with Ms. Gulleson. An important issue of this election is whether defense budget cuts are going to go too far. We're facing, as you folks have already talked about, the huge deficits. President Obama wants to rein in the growth of defense spending coming off a decade of foreign wars. He says that the things he's proposing won't hurt American security. Mitt Romney has a lot different take on that. He says defense budgets need to grow. We've heard him say that perhaps by tens of billions of dollars a year to the Pentagon's core budget. The question is, Where do you come down on that? Obviously, this is national security, but also would have big impacts on North Dakota. We're a military state, as you well know, major bases, Air Force bases, Minot, Grand Forks, a lot of people sitting on edge. There's talk, we're talking to some people, they say politicians don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole prior to the election, but there's talk that if Obama is elected, there will be a series of BRAC cuts that will be discussed after the election. We're facing more rounds of BRAC. We know that the bases at North Dakota Bailey survived those in the past. The impacts to the state would be enormous, loss of jobs, economy, besides the national defense security. And I guess, Pam, we'll put that question to you. Where do you come down on defense budget?
Well, Admiral Mike Mullen, who was the former chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he made a comment, I think it was a couple of years ago, that said that the U.S. economy is the #1 threat to our national security. This coming, of course, from one of our defense leaders, and reminding everybody we have to get this country back on track. We have to have a strong and stable national economy in order to have the strong national, international security that we've always had. And so how does that fit in? The cuts that the Department of Defense have come forward with on their own, identified, recognizing that we are seeing a change in our military. We're exiting, we've exited one major war, we are exiting the second. We have different kinds of threats, we know that. We have much higher need for intelligence and the kind of highly technical kind of national security as well. So it is shifting. We're going to be changing where we spend our dollars to. We have to adjust to that. We have to keep the national security of our country first and foremost, always at the front side of this. I was part of the background when I worked with Senator Dorgan. Our bases faced all of that. We have faced some new missions as a result, which I think has positioned us very, very well long term. We have a UAS mission, which is one of the areas that we will continue to see expanded as part of our national defense, I believe. And so in that case, I feel like in the state of North Dakota is fairly well positioned under any potential BRAC cuts.
Okay, Mr. Cramer.
Well, first of all, national security is the highest priority of the federal government, thus the highest priority of the federal deficit or federal spending as well. Having said that, Don, I think that the defense spending as well as everything else has to be on the table for possible cuts. But not just random cuts, obviously. Strategic cuts. I think we do have to realize that we have a different world. And I also think there's a distinction between the recent wars and foreign wars that we're pulling out of and the Pentagon, if you will, the Pentagon budget. We need to make sure that that's intact. But the Pentagon and national defense it should be for strategic purposes, not for economic purposes. In other words, as much as we love our air bases, the reason that they're secure is because they're strategically placed, not because they're a jobs program. We have nothing to be ashamed of with regard to our contribution in North Dakota to America's national defense. I am concerned, too, about the growing burden of our national defense on National Guard. The National Guard in North Dakota, we have every reason to be proud of the work that they do, but at the same time, the National Guard, in my view, has been abused in terms of these recent wars especially. That there's been an undue burden on them, and we shouldn't be placing our state guard units in so much harm's way, if you will, by not funding appropriately our regulars. So I think it all comes down in national defense, like it does with a lot of things, and people should expect a more efficient and effective government. So could there be efficiencies without compromising the integrity of the call on the military to protect us? I certainly would hope so, and I would certainly want to challenge that for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a break right now for our stations across the state of North Dakota. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Stay tuned.